All right, I believe we are ready to start now. I just want to give you a little update on next week. Next week, we will not have class. The main reason is I will be out of town, but it also coincides with a prayer walk that will be held next week that kind of corresponds to what Courtney is doing with the family class that she teaches at 6:30 before we get started here. And so next week, if you want to participate in that prayer walk, there will be prayer cards, a prayer card packet that you can pick up at the office or that you can download through our church website on the COVID response page. And so that's available to you as well. So with that, let's jump into finding God in his awesome creation. Hopefully you have downloaded the study sheet and can follow along. If not, just listen closely. Here's the first question. It seems to be a strange thing that two intelligent people can look at the same data, the same evidences, and come to quite different conclusions about what it all means. Some people look at our wondrous earth and universe and conclude that it is the product of millions or billions of years of natural selection and adaptation, i.e. Darwin's theory of evolution. Other people look at the same wondrous earth and universe and conclude that God designed it this way. Such differences hinder people from seeing and believing in God. What do you think it is that hinders people from seeing God in creation?
They're too busy. They're too busy. They're too busy to see creation or to take the time.
Okay, so too busy to even take the time to consider that there is a creator behind all of this.
Yes.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I think it's because they're not looking for
God. Tom, go again. And
I think one thing that occurs to me is that they're not looking for God.
Okay. Because we are believers, naturally would assume maybe that others are looking, but the reality is there's some who aren't looking. They don't have any particular reason for wanting to find him. Peter, what were you about to say?
Someone else was talking. That wasn't me.
Okay.
I'm here, but I am here.
Yeah, I see you now, and you're
Good.
not sideways. That's good.
No, good.
Benita?
I think education, people that are highly educated a lot of times don't find God because they're looking at science or they're looking at philosophy or some other thing besides looking in the Bible or looking at creation.
Okay, there are a lot of people through their educational pursuits who have concluded that there is not a God, largely because it doesn't fit some of the prevailing models. Again, Darwinism, that seems to contradict there being a God.
Dale, one of the things that I thought about is that they don't want to deal with the consequences of what it is if there is a God.
Okay, one of the probably unspoken realities is that for some people, a belief in God is not a mental or cognitive issue. It is a moral issue. They don't want to acknowledge God because acknowledging a God would indicate that I have some accountability to God, and I don't want accountability to God. So for some people, it's not a matter of evidences or not, it's that he kind of cramps my lifestyle. Other reasons.
Dale?
The Big Bang.
Okay, I heard Henry say Big Bang. Again, that's seeming an alternative explanation for creation, and so it seems to exclude a need for God, and so it's something that people reject God because of that. Peter, you were about to say?
Well, David in the Psalms, of course, the famous verse, David said, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." But really, the question of God is the only question that matters. And the fool is a person who has not objectively looked for the answers to the questions. And, I used a phrase with my classes more toward the end of my career is, I don't believe in God because it makes more sense than anything else. I believe in God because it's the only thing that makes any sense. But you can't know that. You can't know that until you say, if there's no God, nothing matters. Stupid, you better at least look at the question. If you don't look at it, you're a fool. Now, if you give it a dedicated search and you say, I've looked at all the evidence and I just don't see it, that's two different people. And we have a lot of people today in our world that do not want to bother to look at the evidence. And if you look at the evidence, it's the only thing that makes any sense.
Yeah, and we're gonna be talking about some of that evidence as we go through tonight. I want to point out two things along those lines. One of the things is that there's an assumption made, and this gets back to the point about education, I think that Benita made, is that there's an assumption that the intelligent people are atheists. And so I want to be an intelligent person, considered an intelligent person, so I will acquiesce my thoughts and I won't explore the question, as Peter is talking about, because I accept what the intelligent people think. I think also there is the reality of what 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and verse 1 says, and that is that knowledge puffs a person up. There's a danger of pride keeping us from seeking and knowing God. And so that's an important piece in this as well. Let me take it now maybe on a little closer to us level, more understanding level perhaps. There are some people who have seen bad things happen to good people. And it's hard for them to accept that there is a God who would allow that. And so they just reject God outright. In fact, it's kind of an ironic thing when you think about it, that some people are angry at God, and so they don't believe in him, which is kind of interesting thinking when you think if there's not really a God, why would you be angry at something or someone that doesn't exist? But nonetheless, that is the case. There are other people who have been wounded by believers. Because they've been wounded by believers, it's hard for them to believe in the God and the Jesus Christ that believers represent. And so what I'm saying by mentioning that is the fact that you and I have a place, or perhaps a piece in this equation of people believing and accepting or not. And so we need to be conscious of how our actions, our words can impact the way that people pursue or don't pursue God. Additional thoughts?
Dale, I was struck that just a couple of weeks ago, two signs of just how powerful that line can be. One is John Lennon, okay, who wrote the hymn of atheism in a song called Imagine. And he preached and convinced a lot of people that there's not anything. So just imagine if we didn't have religion and we didn't have that, we could have a great world. The other token I saw was this young man, Kurt Cobain, okay, who killed himself because he's a nihilist. He preached it, he sang it. Okay, his guitar sold for a record $6 million. Here's a guy who preached to young people in a whole generation, life is meaningless, and he did one of the logical choices. If you don't believe in God, one of them is, why waste time? I'm out of here. And that's what he did. And a lot of young people have followed him. And of course, there are some other choices. There's materialism and there's hedonism. But one of them is, hey, this life is meaningless. Goodbye.
Yeah. And what we see happening around us is in large part a reaction, an understandable, even reasonable reaction if you reject there being a God. Jerry, you have lit up. Were you about to say something?
No.
Okay.
That was Jerry.
All right. It's something that we don't want to put obstacles in people's ways. Okay, that's something that we can control. But there are also things that we can do that perhaps triggers people thinking and considering, at least examining the finding God in the awesome creation that we have. So let's go on to the next question. Some people find special closeness to God in certain places of creation. Where do you like to go or be that helps solidify your faith and feel close to God? So where is it for you?
Peter and I have been going outside and looking at the stars at night in our hammock. And that really brings me close to God, and just looking up at the stars and just knowing how big God is, and just brings it home.
Well, that sounds almost romantic, Carol.
Well, it is too.
It is. Okay. No wonder you like that. That sounds like what a woman would love. And you all are in a great place out there to be able to see with the darkness
Yes.
you have.
Yep.
Yeah. Someone else. What is it that in creation that helps you feel close?
Mountains.
I like to go up to the mountains.
What is it about the mountains, Jim?
The top of the mountain, you see the sky that God, you knew good and well God made. It's so beautiful. And well, in wintertime, the snow, but the creation is just wonderful.
So you go up on the mountains and you see this. In fact, let me put it this way. When many of us go up on the mountains, and I don't know anybody who doesn't have this reaction, but we see this glorious rumbling of hills and trees, and it's gorgeous. The very fact that we can have an appreciation for it, even beyond its creation, but the fact that we can look at something like that and we can appreciate it as something that's beautiful speaks about our design, what we were made to appreciate and be in awe of. So that's significant as well. Someone else, what is it that does it for you? Yes.
Am I on?
You are.
We were just at Yellowstone last week, and the waterfalls and the mountains and the snow peaks and the valleys and the animals. It just was all God's creation. I mean, it was beautiful, and everything about it was beautiful. And I don't know how you can just look around with everything and not believe that there's God. The hot springs, some of them were bright blue, and some of them were like orange and yellowish colors. And it's just amazing how they get different colors.
Kendra, I can see you talking, but I didn't hear you very well.
Oh, I said with the hot springs, I really enjoyed the colors of the blues. Some of them would be really bright blue, and other ones would be like orangey and yellow colors.
See, again, what makes that so fascinating to me is that God created us in such a way that we have an appreciation for this variety of color. Our eyes are stimulated, our brains are stimulated by this this wondrous appearance that we see. You know, to assume or to conclude that that is somehow accidental, random, mindless chance seems like intelligent people couldn't come to that conclusion, but some do. What else? Somebody else?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
2 summers ago, my cousin and I did a skydive. And I remember when we left the plane, it was tandem, feeling that moment of no weight. And as we were falling, I was yelling, not because I was scared, because it was so incredible. To see the world, and I've flown a lot of places, but this is different. To feel gravity like that, and the weightlessness there for several seconds. And then when the chute opened up, to feel that, and then to look down at the earth and see trucks and cars and things like that, I could not talk. And when we landed, the guy that I flew, or that skydived with, he asked me, he said, "What did you just do?" And I looked at him and I said, "I flew." I guess I wanted to know what it felt like to fly, but gravity is not something we pay that much attention to, and God put it in place. I've done some reading about Neil Armstrong and NASA, the beginning of NASA, and some of the scientific things that they have come up with that are absolutely incredible. And the only way those scientific facts have come about is because God had them in place from the very beginning, and it took man to figure it out. But I mean, there's no other way these things could have happened without God.
Yeah, and I want us to read in just a moment Psalm 19 that really highlights what you're saying. But I want to make this last point before of places. When I consider really any aspect of creation, it is a humbling thing. For instance, how a seed becomes a fruit tree, how ants work together without a true leader, how birds in North America fly south for the winter. Is that all adaptation, or is that creation and design? And it's hard for me to understand any other viable explanation other than there's something that has been built in. So let's go to Psalm 19. If someone would read verses 1 through 4 for us, that would be great.
The heavens proclaim the glory of God. The skies displayed his craftsmanship. Day after day, they continue to speak. Night after night, they make him known. They speak without a sound or word. The voice is never heard. Yet their message is gone throughout the earth.
And their words to all the earth.
Well, it says A. Oh, and the words to all the world.
That's what Donna was talking about. That's what others have been talking about, how as we look around, there's a declaration going on. Creation is speaking and proclaiming the glory of God. It's consistent. It's all done without words. And it's a marvelous, amazing thing. So what is something in creation where you see the mark of design?
Yeah, I started to say this on the previous question, but it fits here as well. Back when our kids were in junior high and high school, we had a retreat where we went to Central Texas and was up on one of the hills there. And the question came up, what do you see that speaks about God? And I just happened to look down and, of course there's, beautiful vistas, looking around, seeing all the magnificent, the hills and such like that. But there was this little bitty tiny flower just coming up through the cracks in the rock. And, you look at flowers and the various designs that you see in flowers and other things in creation. That really speaks to, God put the seed in there to where it could come up, in bare rock almost. I mean, just a little bit of soil in the crack of a rock. And it comes up and grows and propagates. All of that speaks to the design of creation that God put together for us.
Absolutely. Someone, what do you see? Design, Brenda?
Okay, I have kind of a different take on it. It's kind of like two extremes. I've been blessed to be able to travel a lot with my family and see a lot of things. And when you're standing on the precipice of a mountain and you're looking down at the ocean, or you're looking at a vista, or even if it's outside looking at the stars, it's so big. And it's when it makes me realize I'm so little. I'm nothing, I'm looking at these mountains that are just thousands or hundreds of feet high for sure, but sometimes thousands of feet high. And it's like, how is this all put together? How are these volcanoes put together like this? And on the opposite end, like what Tommy was talking about, the little thing, the little microorganisms and stuff, how you see they all work together. And it's like, I'm glad I'm not in charge, because it's bigger than me.
Yeah, it is humbling and it does make you feel very small. Yeah. Someone else, where do you see design?
Dale.
Yes.
I don't talk just a whole lot, but I see design in a lot of things. We went recently to the top of Pikes Peak, and we were able to see God's design in all of the mountains and the just stunning landscape and views that we could see. But then again, when I'm at home, and simple things like our pets or animals, they're blessings from God. I was real upset one day, and our big Labrador Retriever took his favorite toy that he wouldn't let anybody have, and he came and put it in my lap to make me feel better. Mm-hmm. And God blesses us in all of those. And I see the design there. And it's something at home. It's something real simple. But not all people feel the same things about their animals, but we do. Yeah. And it's like Donna says, our Labrador is maybe the best human we ever met. He takes care of us. And that's a blessing from God.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing to see the design and that blessing that you're experiencing. I want to mention a few things that are a little more in the I don't know, evidences area, apologetics area, just for your knowledge. Your body is something that in and of itself amazes you. Mine does me. The involuntary muscles, like the heart that keeps beating. We had several years ago, probably close to 20 years ago, a scientist come by, largely because of Jonathan Witt, and he had written a book called The Privileged Planet. And in that book, he talks about how we as a planet, Earth as a planet, are located to have life and view the universe, and how it seems like it was all designed that way. There's a scientist who came up with this concept of irreducible complexity, that everything has to, that for an organism to even exist, for it to live and be viable, everything has to be in place for that organism to survive. It cannot evolve. It cannot gradually add things over millions, thousands, or hundreds of years. It all has to be in place at one time in order to exist. The term he used is irreducible complexity to talk about that. And so much of life demands that irreducible complexity. It wouldn't exist if you didn't already have those things in place all at the same time. And then there is the fossil record. In Canada, in the Burgess Shale area, in fact, I should preface this by saying I have a book in my library called Darwin's Doubt. And Darwin had this doubt because of the fossil record, and it gets back to this idea of irreducible complexity, that if there was something, some organism that it could not evolve, evolution could not explain it because you had to have all these pieces together at one time, then his theory didn't work. Well, interestingly enough, in Canada, there is a place, or in the Burgess Shale, in the Rocky Mountains of Canada, where they have a fossil, a massive fossil find. And here's the interesting thing about it. In this fossil record that has now been kind of dubbed the Cambrian explosion, they have found animal and life types of all kinds, some of them which were supposed to evolve one to the next, but they're all there at the same time, fully formed as we know them today. There was no evolution. All this genetic information seemed to be present at one time. Now, what does that mean? That means that the story of creation and the flood is a much more legitimate explanation for the Cambrian explosion than evolution is. So the fossil record itself points to design, it points to a flood, it points to there being this great and awesome creator. Anyone else have something that you see design in?
Dale?
Yeah.
One of the sure signs is that the most brilliant people on both sides of this argument in question, the anti-evolutionists will not, they won't discuss anymore. They won't debate anymore. They won't go to seminars anymore. They've just pulled out because the other guys, like the ones that do NCR or ICR and those guys, They cannot talk with them. And so all they can do is ridicule and laugh and walk away. And so they're just telling people it's too preposterous. They will not get together and talk about the evidence honestly. And when I stop talking it's a sure sign that I've run out of arguments.
Yeah, that I know I can't win this debate.
Yep.
Yeah. So I say all of that to encourage you to not be intimidated by what's amounting to a lot of rhetoric. And so I wanted to at least touch on some apologetic stuff, because when you talk about creation and it pointing to God, you have to touch on some of that. And what I want to confirm to you is, as Psalm 19 says, the heavens do declare the glory of God, and the firmament does show his handiwork, and we can see it all around us. So let's go to Genesis 1, verses 2 and 3. Somebody read those two verses, please.
And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the water. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light.
And of course, the succeeding verses explain what happened each day. What of God's vast creation work would you like to have witnessed, and why?
To me, Dale, it would be the animals.
Why?
I'm just amazed by how many different animals we have freely, and then when I go to the zoo, how many other animals I see that like Africa animals and stuff like that I don't see down the road and stuff. But just to be able to, what was he thinking? Just being by him and just saying, I want to make a tiger, and here it is, and just blows my mind of just the different the birds, just how, wow, it's just amazing how many birds we have in this world. I mean, that's something that I would have loved to walk right next to him and just say why and how'd you come up with that, and that's amazing. That's beautiful. That's just awesome. I mean,
You and I are thinking the same way on this one, Henry. I'll tell you. I'd want to ask him, why'd you make the giraffe's neck that way? Why'd you create the octopus with so many arms? Why an elephant's trunk? Why with this big hippo, you got this teeny little tail on the end? Why did you give cheetah such speed? And so a zoo is a marvelous place to visit and talk about.
Yeah. Dale.
Donna, go ahead.
I have often wondered, and maybe I shouldn't think about these things. I think I would have wanted to sit down with God before creation and ask him how he planned everything out that a giraffe would have a neck like that. Why? What's the reason? But it's just everything is in creation is so linked to each other. We need flies for, I don't know really why we need flies, but we need flies somehow. We need rabbits. How did he link all of life together the way he did, and why do turtles have a hard shell and things like that? I've wondered, how did Adam know what to name the different species? But to me, it would be asking God, what is the blueprint, and how come a snake? We need snakes to help keep the rat population, just stuff like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
So the interconnectedness, you would have liked to have understood the interconnectedness of all of that. Yeah. Someone else, what would you like to have been there to see?
Dale?
Yeah.
Being a Navy person that's been on the ship up and down the Atlantic Ocean, it was amazing, from bad waters to calm waters to all the different type of fish I got to see. I would enjoy seeing all that done by God.
Mm. So the marine life would have been interesting to you, and boy, the marine life is as fascinating as the animals are that walk upon the land. The marine life is pretty fascinating too. All right, well, let's move on to the next question. Increasingly, it seems that beliefs are more based on feelings than facts. Many arguments to persuade are not about evidence, but about implication. For example, a Christian college administrator once told me that when a student enters his office and explains that he is beginning to doubt his belief in God, the professor soon asks, "Who are you sleeping with?" In other words, our attitude toward God is often formed by whether we want to adhere to his will for us. So it can be very helpful for us to understand that the obstacles to finding God are not that God has given insufficient evidence of his existence, but that his commands don't fit all lifestyles. The Green Lawn Church building is located beside Lubbock Christian University. We are not far from South Plains University. Texas Tech is in this town with 40,000 students who hopefully will return in the fall. So here's the question, and this has relevance to us as a church. If you worked on a college campus, what would you do to help students find God? If you worked on a college campus, what would you do to help students find God?
I think constantly talking about it in the education. You know, my thought when we were talking about the very first question is there's a lot of willful ignorance. And so not allowing that, but, you know, because the evidence for God is plain from creation. And so to talk about it, like Peter said, instead of them just blowing you off like, oh, that's just nonsense. No, let's discuss it. Let's find out why you struggle with your belief, and then let me show you why I believe, and how you can believe just by seeing the giraffe, the trees, the mountains, the ocean, the birds, and the way everything's interconnected, and even the way our human bodies work, and the way a seed has to die to become a plant, and that cycle of life that goes through. And so I think it's just a lot of education and making it known, talking about it, pointing it out.
So you would press a person and not let them get away with, oh, that's just foolishness and, you know, crazy stuff, that creation stuff. You would say, okay, maybe it is. You show me. Let's sit down. Let's talk about it then. Good. Education. What would you do?
I think in order for them to approach you to some degree is they need to see you practicing your faith.
Okay. And so first, along the lines of what Donna's talking about, I would show them God's love by caring about them and listening to their story. That God can be seen through us as his ambassadors. That's really kind of what Donna's hitting at. I'd ask them questions about their story like, when did you start doubting God? What was going on? What is making it hard for you to believe in God today? How does belief or disbelief affect your life? Sometimes the disbelief, if they come from a Christian family, creates tension with their parents. Sometimes having a disbelief or rejecting God brings them into acceptance by professors. And so then we would begin, kind of like what Mike was saying, to answer some of the specific questions. What is it that you have doubts about? What is it that you're struggling with? You see, doubt is not necessarily a failure by parents or by teachers. Doubt is not the opposite of faith. In fact, we need to make room for doubt, especially as our young people encounter these alternative explanations for our existence, and walk them through it, because the evidence is on the side of creation. Okay, as Peter pointed out earlier, it is not a debate anymore about what is the most feasible, reasonable, rational explanation. It now has, the debate has diminished into name calling and dismissiveness. So don't be afraid of having those conversations. What the opposite of faith is disbelief. Doubting is not the opposite of faith. Disbelief is the opposite of faith. And I think most of the time, if it is a sincere doubt, we need to continue to engage people in the discussion rather than kind of dismissing them so that they have no other place to turn than to disbelief. I've said a lot of words there. Somebody react to that. Can I get an amen then? Or
Amen.
Amen.
be quiet, or you don't know what you're talking about, or something like that.
Well, Dale, I mean, I like the way you approached it as far as trying to find out and figure out exactly what's bothering the person, you know. I kind of look at it kind of like, you know, there's going to be a narrow road to heaven, you know, and there's good fruit from a good tree, and there's bad fruit from a bad tree. And, you know, and don't, you know, to me, don't fall away from your faith, you know, and plus there's going to be a lot of false prophets out there, you know, trying to pull you a different way too, you know. But I like your approach of you really finding out what the person is feeling before.
I think that's the right approach, Henry, in whatever we're talking with people about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we are giving answers to the question that people are not even asking, because we haven't taken the time to ask them what's on their heart, what they're struggling with. And so
exactly,
we need to find out what's going on with them. I've told the story before of my cousin who's just a couple months older than me, and he was open to studying the Bible together, and you know, and here I was talking about salvation and what he needs to do to believe and repent and be baptized. And you know, I thought I was going to get him to the baptistry that night, and he stopped me about after me doing all the talking for about 30 minutes. He stopped me and he said, "I'm not sure I believe in God." Well, I didn't even find out where he was in all of that. And so I was answering the wrong question. He wasn't ready to talk about Jesus Christ and salvation. He didn't know if he believed in God. So asking, you know, I've had to learn a lot of things the hard way because I'm a little slow. So
me too.
that's where a good place is to start.
Yeah.
Any other ideas?
And one thing that crossed my mind is that sometimes what we need to do is not be dismissive to other people and think of them as idiots or stupid for not believing in God, and rather engage them in conversation, because it's so easy just to think that everybody needs to think like I do. And too many people do that on all sides of many issues, but specifically as it relates to salvation or believing in God, don't just dismiss people for what they do believe or don't believe.
Somebody read 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15 for us. Who's got it? Who would do it? And what I want you to focus on, whoever's reading it, is I want you to focus on the last part of the verse, because the first part is very familiar to us. Sometimes we forget the last part. So somebody read that, please.
I got it.
All right.
But in your hearts, set apart Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect.
Isn't that what you're talking about, Tommy?
Yes.
Yes. There's such a thing as being right, but being right in the wrong way, which can make you wrong. So not only do we need to be able to convey the proper information, we need to convey it in keeping with the Spirit of Jesus Christ, with gentleness and respect, as Peter talked about in 1 Peter 3:15, and Mike just read for us. All right. Last question. 1 Chronicles 16:23 reads, "Let the whole earth sing to the Lord. Each day proclaim the good news that he saves." Now that's an interesting passage, especially in the light of the fact that Jesus was still a couple of thousand, well, maybe not quite that far, but was several hundred years away from his death, burial, and resurrection. So in what way does creation proclaim the gospel? Have you ever thought about it that way? That the creation proclaims the gospel. In what way does creation do that?
Dale?
Yeah.
I think about going to the beach, and no matter how many holes we dig or sand castles and all the things we do to mess it up, what happens when you go back the next day? It's all been washed away, and you got a clean slate. That's grace.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what is the gospel about? Well, we know what Jesus did in order for the good news to be good news. And what he did, as Mike is pointing out, is the gospel is about new beginnings and being a new creation. And so creation shouts that, just as a simple example as Mike's talking about. You go and you build this beautiful, wondrous sandcastle one evening, and the next day after the tide comes in, it's gone. You start. What other ways do you see that creation proclaims the gospel?
Dale, I think the sun rises every morning when you get up and you look at that sunrise, and it's always different depending on the clouds or the day, but it's always fresh. It's just a new day, a new day to live.
Morning by morning, new mercies I see. No applause, no nothing there. I'm trying hard. I'm trying hard with this group. You're in a tough audience tonight. That's what the Lamentation 3 is talking about. God's faithfulness. His mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. It shouts of God's new beginnings and fresh start. How about the seasons?
Dale, can I say something? I was just thinking about
Yeah.
What occurs to me is in this question is, how does creation proclaim the gospel? To me, God is wanting this relationship with mankind. So we can look around and see how magnificent creation is. And that should point us and to help us want to seek God. How do we have a relationship with God? Is through the gospel. Death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ allows us to have that relationship with God. So that's the way I see it. It points us to God, and it helps us understand that it's the gospel that restores that relationship.
Mm. Yeah. And that's exciting and wonderful to know that we have a God who has worked so diligently to make that possible.
Dale,
Yeah, Roger.
Jesus gives us the example of a seed being dropped into the ground, and the seed has to die in order to come back and be a plant, which is literally the gospel, for the simple reason that Christ died on the cross, was buried, was resurrected, which gives us the hope of the same thing, which we then reenact when we go through the act of baptism at the conclusion or toward the end of the gospel presentation and our response to that presentation. So he gives us the perfect example, if you will, of what he did and how we reenact that in order to take advantage of what God has given us through the gospel.
Isn't that marvelous? Again, that's happening every day around us. Seeds are typically in the fall, they fall out of the tree, and then they get implanted in the ground, and undisturbed, they begin to sprout up new life. And so that's an amazing thing that God has put that illustration all around us of the gospel works and what the gospel is about. I mentioned the cycle of the seasons. We go from winter into spring, and the deadness comes to life. So that's a part of this. But one of the things I want to impress upon us as we finish this question is God gives us fresh starts. It's not, when we make a commitment to Jesus Christ, it is not a matter of simply being added to the club. We start life over. And for most of us, if not all of us, that means there are a lot of junk that we probably have to get rid of in our lives. Things that we were taught in our family of origin, things that we picked up along the way that don't belong in the life of a disciple of Jesus Christ. Praise be to God that we have that opportunity for newness of life and a new start. It's fresh. You don't have to keep carrying the same stuff around.
Amen.
I heard somebody say amen, didn't I? Didn't?
Yes, sir.
Well, say it now if you know.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. I'm gonna have to give you all instructions before we start class next time.
Yes, sir.
Or cues. I'll make a sign and say amen or clap or something. You'll know, kind of like the way shows are done on TV.
Applause.
There you go. All right. Well, there's still some sunlight left. So I encourage you to go out and take a walk. And while you walk, have your focus be on where you see God in the awesome creation around you. Have a blessed evening, everybody. We'll see you on Sunday. Good night.